Hi running pals, good morning. It's chilly but I'm gonna start running soon. This video I'm going to talk to you about the top 10 running podcasts I've listened to this year, also talk about well, where I listen to them, and I'll mention other podcasts that I listen to a lot because I don't just listen to running ones at all. So let's get going, I guess. Okay, pause my run to tell you about the first podcast, which is quite one you might already know, RunPod. It's by Jenny Falconer, and she usually interviews what I would describe as B-list UK celebrities, like minor to moderate British celebrities who you'll know if you're in Britain, but sometimes she interviews like proper athletes, and the people she has on are always quite interesting. She just talks to them about running and their lives in running, and it's nice to hear quite a variety of perspectives. She works in the media as well, so she's really good at like speaking to people, and I really enjoy that podcast and I look forward to it every week. If you're a fan of people talking to each other podcasts, I would recommend Marathon Talk. As the name suggests, they talk about marathons, about training, all things like that, in like a chatty, semi-structured way. And that's really interesting as well, because sometimes on a long run especially, you kind of just want to switch off and listen to other people talk for a while. And that podcast is a good one for that. So, Marathon Talk. Similar to RunPod, she sometimes interviews people, she sometimes talks on her own. It's good, I think, if you're a female runner, it's probably slightly better for you, but she does just talk about marathon training. And she has a really good episode on eating disorders. I suffered from one when I was in my second to third year of university, lost loads of weight, and I'm mostly better now, but listening to that kind of made me realise that I need to keep checking up on it. Sometimes I treat exercise a bit more as a way to burn calories than I should, but that episode is really good. I'll put all the links and everything in the bio, especially, and I'll point to that episode. But yeah, I really enjoyed listening to Welfare, especially when I was training for last year's marathon in London, and yeah, definitely worth a listen. So numbers 4 and 5 are kind of corporate podcasts, I guess, but that is to its benefit. So there's the Strava podcast. The Strava podcast is a podcast by Strava. They're just some really good athletes, and not just runners, they get all kinds. I've had to move away from the road, it's so loud. Right, I'll go here in this little nook. Runners World next, and along the same lines, they're a corporate podcast in that sometimes they try and get you to buy their magazine at the end, but because they're like well known, they get some really good guests, usually really knowledgeable people, physios, athletes, runners, a whole variety. So if you look at their podcast, they have the guest of the week listed. So just scroll through and find ones that catch your eye, have a listen. Really recommend. I know a lot of people have heard of Runners World, but I thought I would mention it in case there were some people who hadn't. Stood in another little nook for this one. Number 6 is also quite well known, the Running Commentary podcast. This is 2 comedians who record themselves on a run, kind of like I'm doing, but they actually run and talk. And they just have chatty discussions about their lives, comedy, running, their families, everything. And I really like chatty 2 people talking to each other podcasts, so I really like this one. If you haven't listened, definitely listen. They're a great kind of accompaniment because they're sort of huffing and puffing along with you while you're running, as well as chatting, so it's kind of like you're running with them but they never ask you anything. Yeah, number 6, running commentary, if you haven't listened already. Okay, another really good podcast that's more popular in America, I think, is the Not Real Runners podcast. This podcast is by 2 Americans who are just normal people, but I love it. It's hilarious. It's 2 friends, both with like normal lives, normal jobs. It's called Not Real Runners because they like jog marathons, like they'll do like 6-hour marathons, that kind of thing, but they're so funny and they do loads of good training and it's just hilarious. They do a lot of races like the Run Disney races. They always dress up for it as well, like as in big costumes. It's really funny. Definitely listen if you have like, I don't know, if you like laughing on a run, I would listen to that. This is Woolwich Common, by the way. It's like a big green space. It's amazing. I was aiming for here when I started my run, like just in the middle of southeast London, a giant common, which makes you feel like you're, I don't know, it's similar to Richmond Park, I would say. Anyway, next podcast. I think I'll do the rest of these here because I've really had trouble finding anywhere quiet. Right, Marathon Medic. This podcast is a podcast by my friend Amy. She's a doctor and she has a podcast where she talks about running in terms of, well, related to her knowledge of being a doctor. She has a few different series, running and travel. The first one was running and mental health, and I actually did an episode with her where I talked about my OCD. But it's so good, like, because she really knows what she's talking about. She's a great interviewer, so please go and have a listen to that. I'm not saying watch my episode, don't worry, but she has a really good podcast and I think she deserves a lot of recognition for it. And podcast recommendation number 10 is the Marathon Investigation podcast. There's a website, I don't know if you've heard of it, called Marathon Investigation. This guy is really good with like databases and stuff like that. The reason I'm geeking out is I'm a data analyst, databasey kind of person, so this is all quite like interesting. But basically he catches race cheats who have basically cheated in a race, like skipped a lap, jumped over the barrier at Tower Bridge, everything like that. So that's really fun, and the podcast just kind of covers all of that as well, and he chats to people about cheating in races, and it's very interesting. Disclaimer, there was some stuff where people hounded a guy who was cheating. Don't do that. People cheat and they deserve to be caught and their results taken off, but they don't deserve to receive like massive amount of hate, because that had a really tragic ending. So don't do that, please. But cheats shouldn't be able to get away with it, and I think it's really nice that even that he's highlighting ways that people do cheat, and I may well do a video on it once races are back up again. When will that be? But yeah, that is the 10th podcast, and that concludes the list of running podcasts that I would recommend. I love podcasts, which is why I barely use my Spotify Premium. When I got the Spotify Wrapped this year, it was like not very much, so I need to listen to more music, but I love podcasts, so what can I say? But yeah, thank you podcasts for being with me on all my runs, and thank you audience for listening. Bye!
I listen to my podcasts on the Overcast app. You can also listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, a few others that I'll put in the description. Also, if you're looking for a particular podcast, maybe a niche interest one, try looking on the podcast subreddit on reddit.com or on listennotes.com. Again, I'll put all those links in the description. Have fun!